the idea of telling a story about a community that I'm not from. I
Yeah,
did not grow up
yeah.
in Jane and Finch. I used to be a track and field athlete, and in my track days, I used to go to York University to train, and I had a lot of teammates that were from that community. But so I feel like I've had association with the community, but I never, lived or worked or spent an incredible amount of time in the Jane and Finch community. So for me, I thought that's not my story to tell. So for me, it was the way I thought I could morally tell the story was to tell it through his eyes. And so I could only tell the story of Jane and Finch through his experience and his viewpoint and his eyes and the way he sees the community. Because although I was spent time there for for a few years in developing the film and making the film, I felt like the profound understanding of the community comes through his experience and his eyes, and so that was my approach into unpacking what Jane and Finch is and how Jane and Finch appeared in the film.
Isn't that a constant problem or challenge to a documentarian, to a documentary filmmaker?
Absolutely, absolutely, and I think again, there's a constant debate, especially now with this racial awakening in Canada. Who is allowed to tell what stories. And, I believe anyone is allowed to tell any story. I believe Allison said this great quote to me once where she said, well, like, anyone can tell a story about a black community or black communities, but black people tell it better. So it's,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Bottom line, absolutely. Elise, you've been part of this journey. What's it been like for you?
Allison and Gaddy, like, to be honest, when I first started with the company, like Mr. Jane and Finch was my introduction into how they worked, right? Into the kind of films that they made, into what they were about. So for me, it's twofold. For me, it was, okay, these are people who are sort of telling this really great story, and sort of giving me also a lesson, because I am an immigrant. I'm an immigrant, and I've been here a long time, but I also struggle with sort of feeling at home in this place and space. And for me, like, seeing community and community surrounding Black people is something that I actually had no relation to in terms of Canada, right? So for me, like, that was my experience with the film, sort of looking in on a community, a racialized community, that for people that looked like me, of people fighting for their community that I had no context for, because I sort of had come into Canada in a space that was not, I lived in Markham, not even in Scarborough, and it was just unfamiliar to me. So I mean, yeah, it was two things about the film that struck me, that made me love it. And yeah, like, that was my experience with, that was my experience, introduction to them and introduction to community that I had never seen before.
Yeah, I guess my question is two parts. And, we all experience a documentary or a film in our own individual way. So there's the takeaway from how a documentary or a movie affects us. But you both have had a different experience in that you've been involved in the production and all of the conversations and the personal connections leading up to the release of the film. So you have a history and a relationship with all of the actors and all of the players and all of the politics that are going on around it. And I'm just wondering what's changed for both of you.
I can't make documentaries without building those relationships, and so, like, Mr. Larose, we built a relationship through that process, and that relationship hasn't changed. It is this kind of continued. We do check in with each other, and I keep in touch with him. I missed his birthday race this year, but COVID, and stay in touch with some of the other folks that were in the film. But really, he was kind of the one person that I stayed in touch with, and I think just bringing the conversation about the politics that the film has brought up, I think has kind of brought me to other spaces of talking about political engagement more than I probably would have prior, and connecting to other communities who can use that empowerment, I think has also kind of happened through making the film. And I think just having a film like this on the stage that it's on, I think has been important. It's a story about a Black man in a racialized community that has many Black communities within it, and for that to be on a national stage like CBC, it won 2 Canadian Screen Awards, so that recognition. It definitely has helped my career. And
which is always
journey,
good.
which is always good, and I can continue making projects at that level and higher, and I think that's kind of what you can hope for, is so the next project will be easier to make. It won't have to, be a struggle, which might not always happen. But
we're speaking with Gaddy, Conteh George, and Elise Whittington about the documentary Mr. Jane and Finch, about OYA Media, and about documentary film producing. What's the reaction been like to the documentary?
It's been great. I think, we've had just so much support. I think from across Canada, every community every major city has a Jane and Finch. Every city, I think, has a Jane and Finch, and so I think people can relate to it. People can relate to the working class, because that's what that neighborhood is. It's a neighborhood full of working class, hardworking people. I remember reading when we were doing research that neighborhood has one of the highest number of community-led organizations in the city. And one thing that I did learn from that community is just how much it really is a community like that. Just through all the community, or it's almost because I think the public planning in the city kind of left it to rot, to be quite frank, over in the 80s and 90s, when they had high crime rates and people just ran with the stereotypes and didn't really give the community the support it needed. So the community took that into its own hands. And so to see the level of community organization and community support that happens in Jane and Finch is incredible. And it's inspiring. And I think other communities can learn from them. And I think just the reaction, also because it captured such a moment in Toronto political history, I think that's also what gained its popularity. I mean, I still get surprised when, I bump into people or meet people for the first time and they tell me they've seen my film and they enjoyed it, or they watched it with their mom. And, that always makes my heart warm.
Elise, what do you think?
His character in itself is someone that's really relatable, especially for communities that know people like that in their communities. Like he is singular in his sort of drive to make his community better. And like, at least for me, like there are people like that, in each one of those like communities, and you can see the genuineness of Mr. Larose, and how much he wants to fight for it. So I think that for a lot of people, it's being able to see that, on camera. That's a nice thing to connect to. At least it was for me as well. I feel like it gave me a little piece of home even here, right? Just, absolutely. So that as well.
I was also just going to say another thing that I heard quite often from people, where they just were shocked at what the electoral process looks like for a candidate.
Yeah.
How much it costs, what the different things you have to go through just to kind of get that recognition, to see someone who's so beloved by the community have to struggle so hard to get that same support from the community. It's like, how do you turn general community support and community love into votes? Mm-hmm. And what that difficulty looks like. So I think the film did a good job of like demystifying that, and so people can kind of understand, like, there is a disconnect from community support to electoral, that kind of political support, and hopefully the film can help to bridge that gap, so that we have more Mr. Laroses running, and we have more Mr. Laroses, being victorious and getting those seats in politics.
Yeah, I was so disappointed with the documentary that he didn't win. I was heartbroken.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was tough.
But he has such an impact. What do you think the impact of the documentary will be?
Well, I think just that if it can show people that I mean, it's not the right ending, but if it can show people that, you know, if you have love for your community, you can, you know, turn that love into, you know, political will, you know, that community activism and that community grassroots work is very much like political work, works that politicians do, especially on a city councilor level. It's not much different. Like I found it really hilarious, and I kind of wish we kind of put that more in the film. But when there'd always be a debate, because he was up against two sitting councilors, and especially the one that was from his ward before they joined the wards. Every time that politician would speak up and try to say, "Well, I brought a boys and girls club to the community through Mr. Larose. I brought this initiative to the community initiated by Mr. Larose." And it was just kind of really interesting to see that all of the things that so many things that the politician would say that he brought to the community, he did for the community, almost every single one of them were things that were brought to him by Mr. Larose. But Mr. Larose, because he wasn't in the city councilor seat, didn't have he wasn't in the position to push it through and get the official funding and things like that. But so much of what happens on a city councilor level is akin to what community activists do, and I think just demystifying that, if the film can do that and convince other people to run and have that local representation from people who truly understand the needs from a community, I'm happy.
Yeah, I think you did excellent work. It's a beautiful documentary, and I hope one day I get to meet him. He just seems like such a magical person. So what's next for OYA Media?
Oh,
what isn't next?
What's next?
Yeah, so OYA Media, we are, like one of our core mission goals is to amplify stories of Black communities, in Canada and in the diaspora. And so right now, Allison is in Jamaica filming one of our feature documentaries, which is called Bam Bam, the Story of Sister Nancy, which is about just that. Sister Nancy, who is an iconic reggae artist who recorded the song Bam Bam exactly 40 years ago. That song has been it is the most sampled reggae song of all time. I think it's been sampled over 160 times or something. One of the most sampled songs in the world. So it's something about that song that just keeps on going. Anyway, it's the documentary is a film about her life and the wild ride that that song created for her life, and the many people who were involved in that process. So we're really, really excited about that film. That's going to come out on Crave probably next year. We also have A Way with Words, a documentary, a feature documentary around the life of Stacey Ann Chin, who is a force to be reckoned with. She's a poet, an activist, a raging lesbian warrior woman. And so the story is about her kind of coming to terms with the really complicated relationship she has with her mother, who abandoned her as an infant, as she raises her own daughter to be, who's growing into her own little activist artist in her own right. So that's another beautiful documentary, and that's directed by Laurie Townsend. And so we're really, really excited about that. And then we have quite a few other projects in different phases of development, working with different quite array of different artists. We're trying to also go over into the dramatic space. We don't only do documentaries. We have a dramatic series in development. We also have a documentary series in development, a VR documentary. So lots of projects on the go. And then we've also launched our nonprofit side, OYA Black Arts Coalition. So we have that going as well.
So talk about that. What is that?
So OYA Black Arts Coalition, OBAC as we call it. Once you owe back, you don't go back.
You never go back.
So